All right, I think we'll go ahead and get started. Um, Welcome, everyone, to the Department of Medicine Grand Rounds. My name's Celia Hayring. I'm one of the inpatient chief medical residents here, and I'm excited to be facilitating Grand Rounds today. Um, for everyone who's attending today, throughout the presentation, any questions that you have, please feel free to submit through the chat function. I'll be monitoring those and collecting questions that I'll pose to our speakers at the end of our time here together. And any other questions or concerns, feel free to reach out to me through the chat function as well. So today we're going to be hearing a joint presentation from Sandra Juul and Mark Harniss on a hidden jewel at UW, the Institute on Human Development and Disability. Sandra Juul, who will start us off today, is a professor of pediatrics and director of the Institute on Human Development and Disability. And Mark Harniss, who will follow her up, is an associate professor in the Department of Rehabilitation Medicine and director of the University Center for Excellence in Developmental Disabilities. So I think with that, we'll hand it over to Dr. Juul to get going.
Great, thank you so much. It's a real pleasure to be here talking to you all. Neither Mark nor I have any financial relationships to disclose. And I thought today I would do something different. I think it's, we present ourselves as whatever our titles are, MD, PhD, neonatologist, director, I'm a researcher, I'm a mom, I'm a wife. We never really talk about how we got there and what influenced us to do what we do. And so I thought we would do something a little different today and talk about that process. So I am first generation. My mother is from El Salvador. My father is from Denmark. They both came to the United States to go to Berkeley and met each other there, fell in love, and got married. So instead of going back to their respective countries, which is what they had planned, they didn't do that. And my father was an engineer and had jobs in several international companies. And so I was born in Sewell, Chile, which is also called the City of Stairs. It's a tiny little copper mining town that's now a UNESCO heritage site. So that's where I was born. I moved to San Antonio shortly thereafter. From there to Abadan, which is where I decided I was going to be a doctor. I was like maybe 4 or 5 years old at the time. Had no idea what that meant. We moved from there to Brussels. I lived there for 6 years altogether, but not contiguous years. From there, we went to Germany and then Paris, back to Brussels. And from there, I finished my high school in Vancouver, BC. So all this time, every other year, we would travel, and the year in between, we would come back to Washington State. And we would come back to Point Roberts, Washington, which is right here. It's this tiny little 4 square mile peninsula that hangs off the coast of Canada. You have to go through Blaine to get there. So it's supremely inconvenient. But once you get there, it's beautiful. And my grandparents would host my sister and myself for the 3-month summer vacation. And so I was a Washington State resident because of that. So when I went to apply for college, the only college I applied for was the University of Washington. And so I graduated from UW. I applied to medical school and I applied to the WWAMI program because after my peripatetic growing up years, I couldn't imagine living in one place for 8 years in a row. So I went to Fairbanks for my first year of medical school, graduated, and all this time I thought I was going to be like some modern day Marcus Welby. I had no idea what was in store for me. But going through medical school, I was really gravitated towards pediatrics. So I did my pediatric training at the UW Seattle Children's Program. And that was my first contact with the CHDD. So as a pediatric resident, one of the rotations, the electives that we could do is going through the neurodevelopmental clinic. And it was a great experience. And then as a neonatology resident, also here at UW, part of neonatology training is a mandatory follow-up clinic. And so for the whole 3 years of fellowship, you have to participate in follow-up clinic to see what happens to these patients that you take care of in the NICU. And then during that time, I got hooked on research. And this was the first mentor, Dr. Alan Hodson, who really influenced what I ended up doing in my life. And he made me realize that, you can treat patients one at a time, you can be a teacher, but really to move the field forward, you need research. And so so the next step in my evolution, after I finished fellowship and I was an attending for a couple of years, I went to the University of Chicago to get a PhD. So it's a very strange track. And Nancy Schwartz was my mentor there and really taught me what research was all about. And so I'll just take a break here and tell you a little bit about the evolution of the IHDD. So to start with, it was called the Child Development and Mental Retardation Center. Our center was, the building was complete in 1967. And this was part of President John F. Kennedy's vision. So he created a network of research and training centers across the US that focused on providing an interdisciplinary approach to help people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. So the name was changed in 1995 to reflect sort of the broader span of what we were doing. So we weren't really doing only children. It was more of a lifetime program. And then in 2023, it's just this last year, the name was changed to Institute on Human Development and Disability to reflect both the breadth and depth of what we do. And you'll hear more about that during this talk. So this is a quote from Mike Goralnik, who was the director for 37 years before me. He said, over 600 people, including 125 faculty members from 26 academic departments, work through the CHDD on a broad spectrum of problems relevant to individuals with developmental disabilities. And then here's my experience with it. So when I came back to Seattle in the year 2000 as a junior faculty member, I applied for and received a pilot grant. And that allowed me to develop an animal model of perinatal asphyxia. That got me preliminary grant data for an R01. I used the scientific cores to get that. And during the R01, that allowed me to do translational work. And I ended up with 2 multi-center trials and 2 UO1s, again, using the scientific cores. And now in 2023, when I'm what my granddaughter calls as old as dirt, I am the IHDD director. And so this is my process, I guess. So I started in 1995, asking the question of whether erythropoietin was present in brain, and if so, where and what cells produced it, and whether it's neuroprotective or not. That bench work turned into more translational work in the early 2000s. And again, I used the genetics core of the IDDRC. And then as I moved into clinical trials, I used, in the translational work, the animal behavior core, and then the brain imaging core, and finally, in the clinical trials, the clinical translation core. So the vision of the IHDD is to see a world where people with intellectual and developmental disabilities can live, learn, work, and enjoy their lives with their families and friends in their own community. And our mission is to support this vision through scientific discovery, interdisciplinary training, community outreach and education, as well as direct services. So we have clinics and family support, we have job training, technical assistance. We're very involved in advocacy and policy change and information dissemination as well. So just so everyone is on the same page, the definition of developmental disability, the federal definition, is that it's a severe chronic disability that's attributable to a mental or physical impairment that is manifested before the age of 22, and there involves substantial functional limitations in 3 or more areas of major life activity, as you can see here. So self-care, mobility, language, capacity for independent living, learning, economic self-sufficiency, or self-direction. And at the UW, our approach to IDD includes research. So we have the IDDRCs, which are the Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities Research Centers. So this supports research to understand normal and atypical brain development, the biologic basis of autism, brain malformation disorders, brain injury and repair, epilepsy, hearing disorders, and treatments. And this is funded through the NICHD. We also have service, and that's primarily through the USAID, so the University Center for Excellence in Development and Disabilities, and that's funded through the AIDD. And then we also have an educational arm, which is primarily through LEND, which is the Leadership Education in Neurodevelopmental and Related Disabilities. And that has funding through Health Resources and Services Administration, as well as the Maternal and Child Health Bureau. And all of these roll up to the Association of University Centers on Disability. So UW is one of 6 centers in the United States with all 3 federally funded core programs. So we're one of 15 IDDRCs, one of 68 USAIDs, and one of 54 LEND programs. And together, these core programs advance knowledge related to IDD through rigorous research and training, translating this knowledge into effective interventions and policies to improve the lives of individuals with disabilities and their families. So the prevalence of IDD is surprisingly high. So 1 in 6 children has a developmental disability, and that translates into around 12.3 million children in the US that are affected. So why are the numbers increasing? Partly because of environmental toxicities. There's an increase in autism, so it's now quite common. It's 1 in 34 children. Trauma, as well as neonatal successes. So 20 years ago, many of the babies that we take care of now would have died. And now they survive, but they're at very high risk for developmental disabilities. So for example, babies, we take care of babies that are born at 22 weeks of gestation now, and with term being 40 weeks. And so many of these babies, they have about a 50% chance of developmental disabilities. Similarly, babies with cyanotic heart defects, we used to provide comfort care. There was nothing that we could do. And now these kids have complex surgeries or heart transplants, and they survive. And then there's many pediatric successes as well. So for example, cystic fibrosis, those kids used to die in their teens, and now they're growing up, and you folks are taking care of them. Spinal bifida is another example. So this is the structure of the IHDD. So we report to the chair of the Department of Pediatrics, who reports to the dean of the School of Medicine. And there's 2 main parts here, the IDDRC, the research component, and then the USAID, which is mainly the service component. And Mark is going to talk about this section, and I'll talk about this. So we have 4 scientific cores. that support our research affiliates. So we have an animal behavior core, a brain imaging core, clinical translational core, and a genetics core. So basically, we're all about empowering the IHDD affiliates through cutting-edge technologies and data analysis expertise. So we support UW faculty that are engaged in funded research of relevance to intellectual and developmental disabilities. The project has to be extramurally funded, peer-reviewed, and require core support. So our core functions are research, education, and knowledge dissemination. Our core services include consultation on experimental design, consultation on grant development, equipment access, training of staff, biostatistical and bioinformatics support, and we also coordinate with other UW resources if we don't have them on our own as part of the IHDD. Several areas of research, including neurodevelopmental research, genetics, for example, brain malformations, the biological basis of autism, et cetera, as you can see here. And so we have over 100 research affiliates, and we support over 100 NIH or foundation-funded research grants. The genetics core is designed to integrate cutting-edge genomic technologies into the research programs of investors to enhance the understanding of IDD. And we do human genomics, functional genomics, as well as model systems. And Dan Doherty is our director. So just for example, in the year 20 to 21, we had 33 investigators using that core. We supported 22 grants, and 22 papers in excellent journals were published. The animal behavior core supports research affiliates using preclinical animal models, primarily rodents at this time. But we do also support work in ferrets and other animals. So we train research affiliates and their staff in appropriate testing protocols, and our leader, our director, is Tommy Wood. The Brain Imaging Core supports affiliates and trains junior investigators to perform scientifically sound research by providing technical support and development for MRI, PET, and electrophysiological acquisitions. So again, they help in experimental design, training and assistance in preparing research subjects, developing specialized equipment and imaging protocols, and managing the post-processing work and analysis as well. So we have lots of different equipment, 2 Philips 3T magnets, 1 Prisma 3T magnet. We have mock scanners, a 14T MRI, multiple EEG and MEG setups, a PET scanner. There's neuropsych testing rooms as well as accessory equipment. So again, highlights for last year for this core, we had 38 projects from 19 investigators. They did 500 MRI scans, 100 EEGs, 200 MEG scans. They held several workshops and developed some new sequences for both MRI and MEG. The CTC, or the Clinical Translational Core, does behavioral evaluation and supports human subjects research, as well as translational research. And our director there is Sarah Jane Webb. So to facilitate human characterization studies, we have phenotyping recording studios and several behavioral coding infrastructure, things like eye tracking, physical movement trackers, and facial and head dysmorphology assessments. And then also they provide consultation and training. So basically we support all the processes throughout research, from design to data generation, analysis, and support in manuscript preparation and data sharing. So some of the accomplishments, just to give you an idea, fetal alcohol spectrum disorder was actually discovered here at UW in the 1970s. And that was a great example of the collaboration that happens between the clinicians who noticed these abnormalities in children that seem to be involved with mothers who drank alcohol during pregnancy. They got together with some of our scientists, created animal models, and that ended up in policy changes and increased awareness of this, and really changed the outcome of fetal alcohol. Similarly, inborn errors of metabolism, we were some of the first people on the block to recognize some of the inborn errors of metabolism, and one of our clinics actually takes care of every single person in the state of Washington who has fetal ketonuria, which is an inborn error of metabolism that if you treat it with diet, you have completely neurotypical development, whereas if you don't get treated, it results in intellectual disability. So similarly for several other areas of disability. And then we are part of a network, and so we have some network projects that are involved, the other 14 networks across the country. And so we're working hard to create programs that early career researchers are involved with, and hope to retain and promote these young people, fostering a community and collaboration. We're working on animal models to standardize some of the models that are being used to model intellectual disabilities. There's work being done in induced pluripotent stem cells, as well as a gene brain project that is creating a database of a variety of genes that are influencing intellectual disabilities. So our affiliates are all over the place throughout the university and at Seattle Children's. And so I encourage you to become an IDDRC research affiliate if you have areas of research that are applicable and in the area of developmental disabilities. So it allows you access to infrastructure, community building, and research dissemination. And the website is shown on this slide at the bottom. And now I'm going to turn it over to Mark, and I'm going to stop sharing and allow Mark to share his slides.
Okay, thank you, Sunny. It's a real pleasure to be here and to present about the University Center for Excellence in Developmental Disability, also known as the UCED. And although my story doesn't include as many interesting locations as Sunny's, I'll go ahead and introduce myself, tell you a little bit about how I got here and how I am connected to the UCED. So my family came from the Northwest, and my grandparents, shown here in their younger years, lived most of their lives in West Seattle and Bremerton, respectively. And so my dad was raised here, and one of his claims to fame is that he really became an avid mountaineer. So he climbed all over the Olympics and has his name on guidebooks for several first recorded ascents of mountain peaks. He also has the maybe dubious distinction of having been the first recorded mountain rescue using a helicopter when he fell down a chute in the Olympics and broke his leg. And that chute is now named Harniss chute in the Olympic Mountain Guide, which is something that he didn't particularly love, but that we as his family members always took as a point of pride. Because of that experience, he helped found the Olympic Mountain Rescue Organization and served as its second chairman. And a few years later, he went on to successfully climb Denali with some of his buddies. He eventually met and married my mom, who was probably one of the few people who could keep up with him. And here they are skiing at Mount Baker. And they were a good team, exploring hiking and skiing really throughout the Northwest. And then even after 3 boys came along, they continued this active lifestyle. And I grew up camping, hiking, and skiing at an early age. And I mention all of this because I have a really deep connection to the Pacific Northwest through my family. And although I haven't always lived here, this has always been home. It's always the place to which we were returning. I did primarily grow up in Logan, Utah, though, where my dad was stationed for work. And that's, where I grew up doing all the things you might imagine someone doing in a small rural town, Cub Scouts and band and swimming and skiing. But Logan was also a university town, and it's the home of Utah State University. So when I graduated high school, I went on to go to school there, took a degree in English literature, which taught me to write, which was a really important thing for an academic, and then went on for a master's degree in instructional technology. And it was during my master's that I first connected with faculty who worked at the University Center for Excellence in Developmental Disabilities at Utah State. And these were faculty in special education who were doing what at the time was really cutting edge work related to technology for teaching. It sounds a little bit dated now, but they were developing instructional programs using laser discs. So I don't know if you remember, laser discs were like phonograph size CD-ROMs. And so working with them, I had a chance to engage in a graduate assistantship that funded my coursework and a master's thesis. And really, because of that opportunity, I became interested in teaching students with disabilities. And it was my first connection really to the world of disability and to beginning to think about how I might engage in that space. That led me to the University of Oregon, where I completed my doctorate in special education with a focus on instructional design. And there was a USED at the University of Oregon as well. And although I didn't work directly in it, I connected with all of the faculty at the USED who were conducting research and teaching on topics related to special education and students with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Finishing up there launched me into faculty roles in teacher preparation, first at Northern Illinois University, and then in my finally a return to the Northwest at UW-Tacoma. And during that time, I developed an expertise in assistive technology for people with disabilities, which really led me eventually to where I'm at today and what I want to talk to you about in terms of the USED. And I've been here at what was originally the CHDD, the Center on Human Development and Disability, and is now the IHDD, for over 20 years in a variety of roles. I began working for the then director of the CHDD as the director of evaluation. After a few years, I moved to the Center for Technology and Disability as a research scientist and eventually took over as director of that program. I transitioned from my research position to a faculty role in the Department of Rehabilitation Medicine about 7 years ago. And then, of course, as of this year, I just started as director of the USED. And although I think this somewhat long wandering route may not make sense when you look at it on the surface, it really has provided me with some good perspective on the value and the importance of USEDs, the needs and the experiences of people who work inside those USEDs, and the families and the individuals with intellectual disabilities who we serve. And so enough about me, let's talk about USEDs and what they do. The purpose of USEDs, as defined in the Developmental Disabilities Act, is to provide leadership in, to advise federal, state, and community policymakers about, and promote opportunities for individuals with developmental disabilities to exercise self-determination, be independent, be productive, and be integrated and included in all facets of community life. And so you can see there's a very strong policy focus to the USED. There's a very strong community integration focus to the USED. And as Sunny said, we are kind of the part of the IHDD which focuses more on applied activities and community engagement. So the USED works towards achieving its purpose through 4 core functions, and this is true for all USEDs across the country. There are 68 of them. That's more than the 50 states because every state has one, but some states have more than one, and many territories also have USEDs as well. The core functions are interdisciplinary training, so that's for new leaders, for direct service providers, for clinical and other personnel, community service, which includes training, technical assistance, model and demonstration services, research, which includes basic research, but is primarily applied research, evaluation research, and public policy research. And finally, information dissemination, which is just dissemination about the activities of the USAID related to ways to improve the service systems for people with IDD. And the USAID's an interesting grant because it doesn't fund a lot of activities. It's a core grant that provides a foundation, kind of an administrative foundation for program development. And the USAID is organized around 7 programs. Most of these programs are self-sustaining and they live inside the ecosystem of the USAID. The USAID provides physical space, it provides administrative support, and it gives a place for these programs to grow and exist. So these 7 programs include a program on adults and elders, the Autism Center, the Center for Technology and Disability, the Clinical Training Unit, the Community Disability Policy Initiative, the Genetics Program, and the Herring Center for Inclusive Design. And I'm going to talk in detail about each of those in just a minute. But before I talk about the USAID programs, I just want to acknowledge, if you don't already know, that the IHDD has 12 clinics that focus primarily on autism, genetics, and child development. A number of these clinics focus on infants and children, and those include cardiac neurodevelopmental follow-up clinic, an infant development follow-up clinic, a clinic focused on late and moderate preterm babies, a fetal alcohol diagnosis and prevention clinic, a Down syndrome specialty clinic, and a child development clinic. And that latter clinic really addresses complex diagnostic cases that require interdisciplinary team consultation. There are also a number of genetics clinics, and I'm going to talk about those a little bit later. Those clinics include both children and adults on their caseload. And the clinics really exist to meet, of course, the needs of the community, the patients and the families, but they also are really important as sites for interdisciplinary training. And so a number of our programs provide opportunities for their trainees to participate in these clinics as part of the training opportunity. Funding comes from a number of sources, UW Medical, UWMC, Seattle Children's, the Washington Department of Health, and some programs are even funded through endowments. And administration and billing is just based on those funding sources. So moving on to talk about the USAID programs, I'll talk about the Adults and Elders program first, which may be of particular interest to this group. So the Adults and Elders program has an adult autism clinic, and it serves adults who are over 18 with autism screening evaluations and behavioral medicine services that include medication management, mental health assessments, and adult transition services. The program also engages in ECHO programs. I'm guessing you're familiar with these. The acronym is Extension for Community Healthcare Outcomes. But these provide training and case review for primary care providers and provider teams. I'm going to talk a little bit more about all of our ECHO programs a little bit later. And the program also engages in a train the trainer model, which is to enhance skills and support, primarily for the wraparound with intensive services or WISE team members. I'll just mention one of the unique projects that the program has taken on recently is to begin developing capacity to provide competency evaluations for people with intellectual disabilities who've been deemed not competent to stand trial and have been held in institutional settings like jails, nursing homes, and hospitals. And this is connected to the True Blood settlement, which some of you may be familiar with, that challenged the unconstitutional delays in competency evaluation and restoration. And so that's kind of an exciting, interesting new project. Moving on to the Autism Center, this program's goal is to support autistic individuals and their families, caregivers, and communities through evidence-based, developmentally sensitive clinical services to do impactful and innovative research and to provide professional training and collaborative consultation. And the Autism Center provides clinical services for individuals who have or are at risk for autism from birth through early adulthood. And it includes evaluations, medical consultation. They have a new sleep clinic, which is really an exciting project. They have an infant clinic. They provide speech services. They have social skills groups. They have psychological therapy. They have a very interesting summer camp program for children and young people with autism. They provide applied behavior analysis, or ABA, intervention services, skills coaching, and they also recently have added occupational therapy. They also deliver pre-service and professional training. So they provide practicum placements for clinical or school psychology and for speech language pathology. They're a practicum site for the UW College of Education's board certified behavior analyst master's degree. And they support postdoctoral training in clinical, developmental, and school psychology, as well as education and other fields. They also do a lot of external training, workshops, in-service trainings, etc., for schools, community agencies, and mental health settings. The program does have a very strong research agenda, including 6 active NIH and foundation grant funded studies, over 140 plus publications, a lot of great work going on there. And they are very strongly engaged in community activities, including information and dissemination efforts. The next center is the Center for Technology and Disability, and I direct this program. The program focuses on really a broad range of topics related to disability and the supportive use of technology. And these programs include the Washington Assistive Technology Act program. WATAP is a program that provides demonstrations of assistive technology for people who are trying to identify appropriate AT. And if somebody finds something that they think will work, then they can actually take it out on loan and sort of try it before you buy it to make sure that that assistive technology will work for them. WATAP is in the same way that the USEDs are across the states. Every state also has an AT Act program, and ours is here in the USED. We also manage the ICANN Connect program, which is the National Deaf-Blind Equipment Distribution Program. This is a program that provides equipment for people who are deaf-blind, and it includes smartphones, tablets, computers, braille displays, screen readers, etc. And Seattle is one of the 2 largest communities of people who are deaf-blind in the country. And then we also have the Independent Living Services for the Blind program. This is a program that supports people with vision loss to maintain independent living in the community. And it includes skills development. So, learning, for example, how do I set my oven when I'm losing vision? But it also includes some lower tech technology like magnification and low vision aids. We also, in the Center for Technology and Disability, have a program called the ADA Knowledge Translation Center, which is focused on helping to increase implementation of the Americans with Disabilities Act, so helping people to understand their rights and responsibilities under the ADA. And we have the University of Washington Employment Program. The UW Employment Program is a supported employment program for adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities and with autism. And it involves job coaches who work with people with IDD, who help them to access and maintain competitive employment at or above the minimum wage. And this is a cool program that is also a very old program, maybe the oldest supported employment program in the country. Another one of our programs is the Clinical Training Unit. This is one of our older programs. It's part of the founding of the USED. This is an interdisciplinary program that provides training, research, and services in the assessment and treatment of children who have or are at risk for developmental disabilities. And they use a family-centered, community-based, culturally competent approach. And the program conducts a number of training programs and has strong community connections. And this is one of the programs that has really strong engagement and connections with the child development clinics that I mentioned earlier. One of the largest training programs in the CTU is the LEND program. It stands for Leadership Education in Neurodevelopmental and Related Disabilities. Sunny talked about it a little bit. And it provides interdisciplinary training for people who are interested in learning more about working with and for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And this program is a cohort-based program. So every year, approximately 35 to 50 trainees participate in the LEND. They come from a variety of disciplines. Typically, there are upwards of 12 plus disciplines represented in the cohort every year, and you can see some of those disciplines in the black box at the bottom of the slide. This cohort includes graduate students, postgraduate fellows, mid-career community-based health professionals, and I think importantly, it also includes families, so parents of individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities, and people with IDD themselves, so self-advocates. And there's a great diversity and a representation in this program, and a lot of people go on to develop careers focused on working with people with IDD. A smaller program of the USED is the Community Disability Policy Initiative. That it's a program that explicitly addresses university to community partnerships on issues related to IDD. And the goal of this program is to connect community needs and interests with research, training, services, and policy development. And a variety of activities have been conducted through this program, including work related to mothers with IDD and their treatment by Child Protective Services, as well as some work related to incarcerated men and women with IDD and their experience while incarcerated, as well as identifying supports as they re-enter communities. The program also supports collaboration with a network of state-level organizations that address IDD, and those include Disability Rights Washington. This is our protection and advocacy agency in the state of Washington that helps people with disabilities understand their rights and ensure that they are able to acquire those rights. The Developmental Disability Council is a statewide council focused on the needs of people with developmental disabilities that is governor appointed, and that council works to develop 5-year plans and support policy implementation. And there are also a number of programs that are focused, that are organized and led and comprised of self-advocates. So they're all people with intellectual and developmental disabilities running advocacy programs. And we work most closely with a program called Allies in Advocacy. And then it's important to note that the USED also has a mandated consumer advisory council. That's a council that is composed of self-advocates, family members, and a number of directors of state agencies. And it's required to be 2/3 either people with IDD or family members of people with IDD. And that group's purpose is to ensure that the USED develops its 5-year plan around the needs of our community, and that we implement that effectively. 2 more programs to talk about. One is the genetics program, and the genetics program supports research and training related to genetic conditions and treatments. They support several clinics that offer diagnosis, assessment, treatment, and counseling services. They're also home to the University of Washington Genetic Counseling Graduate Program. Oops, I think I lost some slides about the genetics clinics. I'm not sure what happened there, but there are 4 genetics clinics, and they are open to both adults and children, and provide genetics counseling as well as genetics testing in a variety of different areas. And those are, since I didn't get them in my slides, those are on our website if you want to take a further look. We also have the Genetics Counseling Graduate Program, which is a Master's of Science degree, which is located in the IHDD facility. And because of that, those individuals rotate through the in-house clinics, including our fetal alcohol clinic, biochemical genetics, our PKU clinic, and our Down syndrome clinic. That's actually a pretty new program within the last couple of years. And the final program is the Herring Center for Inclusive Education. And this is also one of our older programs dating back to the beginning of the USED. The Herring Center engages in research, demonstration, and professional development and training on inclusive early childhood education. Many of you may be familiar with the Experimental Education Unit, or also known as the EEU. This is a school that's on campus that provides equity-based inclusive services to over 200 children and their families, birth through kindergarten. And the school is funded by contracts with King County, the City of Seattle, and Seattle Public Schools. And it includes children with and without disabilities in its program. if you're ever on the south side of campus, you would have noticed that the school is just going through a complete renovation. And so we'll be opening up with new facilities in January or February. The EEU also is here because it provides a training site for students from multiple academic departments. And so lots of students rotate through the EEU as part of their training. In addition to the school, the Herring Center has a professional development team that works with school districts across the state, even sometimes internationally, and they work to build the capacity for equity-based inclusion in schools. And connected with the Herring Center is a research team that's quite successful. They're currently implementing over $11.5 million in active grants and contracts and leading about 8 large-scale research projects. The last thing I want to talk about is the ECHO programs, and I mentioned them earlier, but there are many ECHO programs within the UCED, and it really is one of our cross-program initiatives. The programs offering ECHOs include Adults and Elders, the Clinical Training Unit, the UW Autism Center, and the Herring Center, and there are approximately 11 ECHOs, and these can be roughly categorized into medical focused or educationally focused. The medical ECHOs include Autism Washington, a program that's focused on wraparound services for people with IDD, one that's focused on psychiatric care, one that's focused on resource navigation. And the education ECHOs include ECHOs focused on supporting teachers, educators, and related service staff, one that's focused on parents, caregivers, and families, one that's focused on building collaboration, one that's focused on resource navigation, and another one that's really focused on parents with children with challenging behavioral needs. And I should mention that some of these ECHOs operate year-round with open enrollment, others are time-bound and require enrollment, but all of the information should be available from the link that you see on this slide. The ECHOs are coordinated across 2 cross-program mechanisms that you might hear about. The first is the Washington Include Collaborative, and this is a program that manages the medical ECHOs. And the other is the On-Time Autism Intervention Group, and this is the program that primarily manages the educational ECHOs. I'll just highlight one of the ECHOs, and that's ECHO Autism Washington. This is an ECHO that was launched in 2019. There are twice monthly 90-minute sessions that go on for a year. Participants are Center of Excellence primary care providers, approximately 120 or so of them engaged. And there is an interdisciplinary hub team that facilitates the ECHO that includes psychology, developmental pediatrics, neurology, speech language pathology, nutrition, behavioral therapy, community resources, and also, again, importantly, family and self-advocates. And it was really, this ECHO was really built from the ground up with the inclusion of autistic and family advocates at the core, which I think brings a very important perspective to the discussions that happen within the ECHO itself. A big part of the reason this was developed is to really begin to support primary care providers in communities further away from Seattle to feel more confident in their ability to make diagnoses of autism, so that the center here could focus more on really complex cases. And they have found that there has been a significant increase in autism diagnoses made by the people who participated in the year after participating in the ECHO. So with that, I'll ask Sunny to come back on camera, and we'll just say, that's us. That's the IHDD universe. There's a lot going on. It can be very hard from the outside looking in to understand what it is and what we do. So we're trying to make it a little bit more cohesive. We're now in our 57th year. We are one of the largest IDD focused institutes in the country. And really, Sunny added to our title that we were a hidden jewel. I think that's true. We are unique, and but a lot of people may not know about us, or may not know about all that happens down here. We've been continuously funded since inception, and we are one of the few that have these 3 large complementary core grants, and really provide important training. I think that's a key. All of the work that happens here is connected to the university's mission and really supports training and education for students who will then leave and hopefully become strong professionals working with people with IDD. So why should you connect with us? Lots of reasons. Sunny, feel free to jump in, but there are obviously lots of opportunities for researchers to engage, particularly around the IDDRC, but certainly around the USED as well. Trainees, if you know folks who are interested in developing their skills, there are opportunities here. Clinicians should connect with us if they're interested in developing their skills as well. We're very open to engagement by community members. We have begun a new initiative, or really, I shouldn't say new initiative, a bigger push towards focusing on policy, on taking the evidence that's developed here in the academic setting and making sure that it is translated into practice. And then we have a lot of people who come for personal or family reasons because they are parents of children with intellectual or developmental disabilities, for example. Anything to add to that, Sunny?
I was just going to say that the training part is so important because in medical school, we are not, there's no training in IDD in medical schools at all. And this is now coming up as an issue of physicians are just generally speaking, not very comfortable taking care of people with IDD. And they often, it's a population that often has really complex medical conditions that are associated with the disability. And so so the training that happens at the LEND program is really important. I think there's some grants out there now that to try and get people to introduce working with IDD into medical schools and residency programs because it's definitely a gap in knowledge.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely. Thanks for adding that. And do you want to take this slide too?
Well, we need money. So we have these core programs, and they're federally funded, but the funding has either decreased or been stable, which with the increase in the cost of living basically means that there's about a 50% decrease in the funding that we have over the past decades. And as you could see, we have lots and lots of programs and lots of things that we're trying to do for the community, both locally and in Washington. And now even, Mark didn't talk about this, but we have one program that we're trying to get going for the whole WWAMI program. So we really are a center of excellence for the whole region. And so so if you feel so inclined, please reach out and donate.
Yeah, thanks. And one of the things that hasn't happened with the IHDD much is looking at advancement, and that's something Sunny's really working to help develop opportunities for giving to things that are important to people, and making sure it's clear how that money would work to further the activities of the Institute. And so with that, we're really open to connecting with folks. And if you have questions, feel free to contact us. And then this is an opportunity for, I guess, about 5 minutes of questions, if you have any.
Yeah, one thing I wanted to add was if there's anyone in the audience, or if you know anyone who's interested in policy and sort of the EDI work to include developmental disabilities or intellectual disabilities, please reach out to us because that's something that we're trying to. I know there's people in both internal medicine and in pediatrics who are very involved in this, and we need to find out who they are so that we can all work together towards the same goal. Mark and I are new directors. We just started in June, and so even though we've been here doing our own things for years, it's still hard to, like, UW is so huge, it's hard to know what all's going on there. So please reach out to us if you have an interest in that.
Wow, that was really fantastic. Thank you both so much for joining us today and sharing, and I think educating all of us about an institute that's a new opportunity for me to learn about, certainly. Um, the the main question from the chat that maybe I'll try to let you guys have a couple minutes for is just around, it sounds like it's a really interesting point that came through about increasing diagnoses of autism and sort of realizing that the population that we care for as adult internal medicine providers is going to have kind of a changing demographic to it. And I think then hearing from Dr. Harniss really highlighting around it's not necessarily a part of the traditional training pathways that are in place. I think the question is just mainly about what we can be doing to try to stay abreast of the best ways to learn and stay up to date on practicing appropriately. If you guys have anything to add there.
Yeah, well, go ahead, Sunny. Yeah.
Well, one of the things that I would like to see, so just yesterday I went online and looked at the UW Jedi website and for internal medicine and also for pediatrics, and that work is really important. IDD is not always included in that as a marginalized group, and so one of the things that I'm on a soapbox for, I guess, is to include people with IDD in that work, because it's super important for all the different marginalized populations. And then as far as people who are now surviving, I'm sure you're seeing those people, right? Like I'm a neonatologist, but we now have moms who are coming in who have CFs and cystic fibrosis, and they've survived, and they're now old enough to have children, and they have very specific medical needs. And same thing with the heart disease population. So yeah, and that's actually an issue that we're seeing also, is like the transition from being a child or a teenager with IDD, where there's a lot of support in the schools and so forth, and now they're 20 or 21, and how do you get that support as an adult? So that's a increasingly looming issue, I think, for a lot of families. Sorry, Mark, you wanted to say something too?
No, I'll just add on something really short, which is I think that it's really important to look for opportunities for continuous education, and the echoes are a good place to start. In particular, some of the ones that are focused on resources and so forth. That's where you're going to have a lot of people who are in the same position of learning, who may be people who've been in the professionals for a long time, but need to continue their learning process. And I will say that the other piece is just sort of working on attitude. We hear about primary care physicians who will refuse to take on patients who have certain developmental disabilities because they feel that they're not qualified. But that's really a problem if you're in a rural setting or if you're somewhere where you don't have a lot of options. And so that's part of what that ECHO is trying to do, is to help PCPs feel more confident in their ability. But there is a responsibility on the side of PCPs as well to develop their skill set.
Thank you, guys. It's 1 o'clock, and I want to be respectful of everyone's time, but thank you guys so much for sharing with us today, and thank you to everyone who was able to log in and join us. And it's really been a pleasure.
Thank you all.
Likewise, thank you.